April 18, 1943, the day America killed Japan's greatest admiral, and knew they shouldn't have. You're looking at a decoded intelligence message, and it contains information so explosive that the men reading it are literally shaking. They know where Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto will be, exactly when he'll be there, and precisely which aircraft he'll be flying in. They can kill the mastermind behind Pearl Harbor, but here's what's making their hands tremble. If they do this, if they actually pull off this assassination, Japan will know immediately that their codes are broken, and that knowledge could cost America the entire Pacific War. April 13, 1943. Station Hypo at Pearl Harbor, the top-secret code-breaking facility that had helped win the Battle of Midway, had just decrypted a message that changed everything. Admiral Yamamoto, the commander-in-chief of the Japanese combined fleet, would be flying from Rabaul to Bougainville on April 18th. The message included his exact departure time, his flight path, his aircraft type, even which fighter escorts would be protecting him. It was an intelligence gift so perfect that Lieutenant Commander Edwin Layton, Admiral Nimitz's intelligence officer, thought it might be a trap. Layton brought the intercept directly to Nimitz's office at 6 a.m. Nimitz read it twice, then looked up with an expression Layton had never seen before. Part excitement, part horror, they both understood what this meant. Yamamoto wasn't just another Japanese admiral, he was the Japanese admiral. He'd planned Pearl Harbor, he'd commanded at Midway, he was the strategic genius behind Japan's entire naval war effort. Killing him would be like Japan killing Eisenhower or MacArthur. It would be a devastating blow to Japanese morale, leadership, and strategic planning. But the cost. If American fighters intercepted Yamamoto's flight over the Solomon Islands, hundreds of miles from any known American position, the Japanese would know instantly that their codes were compromised. They'd change their entire communications security, and America would lose the single greatest intelligence advantage of the Pacific War. The codebreakers at Station Hypo had been reading Japanese naval communications since before Midway. That intelligence had saved American ships, prevented ambushes, and allowed Nimitz to fight a smarter war with fewer forces. Losing that capability might cost more American lives than Yamamoto would ever kill. Nimitz stared at the message for a full minute. Then he did something that surprised Layton. He said he needed to ask permission. Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of the entire Pacific Fleet, needed authorization for this operation, not because he lacked authority, but because the stakes were too high for one man to decide. He sent an encrypted message to Admiral Ernest King in Washington. The message was brief. Intelligence indicates Yamamoto will be at Bougainville 18 April. Request permission to proceed with interception. The response took 18 hours. 18 hours during which Nimitz, Layton, and the staff at Hypo ran calculations, war-gamed scenarios, and argued about whether this was worth the risk. Captain Thomas Dyer, one of the senior codebreakers, argued strenuously against it. His team had spent years breaking Japanese codes. They'd developed techniques for reading JN-25, the Japanese Naval Operational Code. They'd recruited linguists, trained analysts, built machines. All of that would be lost if Japan suspected compromise, but others argued just as forcefully for the operation. Yamamoto wasn't replaceable. He was one of the few Japanese admirals who truly understood modern naval warfare, who grasped the importance of carriers and aircraft. He'd studied at Harvard, he understood American industrial capacity, and he'd been against war with the United States precisely because he knew Japan couldn't win. But once the war started, he'd prosecuted it brilliantly. Removing him would leave a vacuum that Japan couldn't fill. The message from Washington arrived on April 14th. It was signed by Navy Secretary Frank Knox, with Admiral King's endorsement, and it had gone all the way to President Roosevelt for approval. The message read, "Execute Operation Vengeance." That's what they called it. Operation Vengeance. Revenge for Pearl Harbor, for the Philippines, for every American ship and sailor Yamamoto had killed. But the operational order that followed was extraordinary in its restrictions. The mission had to look like chance. It had to appear that American fighters just happened to be patrolling in that area, that they'd stumbled across Yamamoto's flight by accident. The Japanese absolutely could not suspect that their codes were broken. Major John Mitchell of the Army Air Forces was given command of the mission. Mitchell was a P-38 Lightning pilot based at Henderson Field on Guadalcanal. When he was shown the intelligence, his first reaction was disbelief. How could they possibly know this? When Layton explained that codebreakers had intercepted and decrypted Japanese communications, Mitchell's next question was the right one. If we do this, won't they know we're reading their mail? Exactly. Which is why the mission parameters were so specific. Mitchell would take 18 P-38s, long-range fighters that could make the 400-mile flight to Bougainville and back. They'd fly at wave-top level to avoid Japanese radar. They'd time their arrival to intercept Yamamoto's flight at exactly the right moment. But after the interception, they had to disappear immediately. No lingering, no dogfighting with other Japanese aircraft, no attacks on Bougainville itself. Hit Yamamoto and vanish. The planning took 3 days. The P-38s needed external fuel tanks to make the distance. The flight path had to avoid Japanese observation posts. The timing had to be precise within minutes, because Yamamoto was known to be obsessively punctual, and Mitchell had to select pilots who could be trusted with the knowledge that this wasn't a normal combat patrol. He chose Captain Thomas Lanphier and Lieutenant Rex Barber as the killer section, the 2 pilots who would actually engage Yamamoto's aircraft. April 18, 1943, 7:10 a.m., 18 P-38 Lightnings roared down Henderson Field's runway and turned northwest toward Bougainville. They flew 50 feet above the ocean, so low that spray from waves hit their wings. They maintained radio silence. They navigated by dead reckoning and Mitchell's stopwatch. 400 miles over open ocean with no landmarks, no radio guidance, just calculations and hope. At 9:33 a.m., Mitchell's formation climbed to 1,000 feet for a brief navigation check. They were 3 minutes early. Mitchell had his pilots circle once to burn time. Then at exactly 9:35 a.m., they spotted them. 2 Betty bombers flying at 4,500 feet, escorted by 6 Zero fighters. Intelligence had said 2 bombers. The Japanese always sent a decoy when transporting high-ranking officers. 1 bomber carried Yamamoto, the other was empty. But which was which? It didn't matter. Mitchell's plan was to kill both bombers. He radioed 1 word: bogies. The killer section, Lanphier and Barber, climbed toward the bombers while the other 16 P-38s engaged the Zero escorts. The Japanese were completely surprised. They'd expected American fighters near Guadalcanal, but not here, not 240 miles behind Japanese lines. Lanphier and Barber attacked from different angles. The Zero escorts were already engaged, trying to chase down American fighters. The Betty bombers broke formation, 1 dove toward the jungle, the other tried to run for the coast. Lanphier pursued the diving bomber. He closed to 200 yards and opened fire with his 20mm cannon and Bot 50 caliber machine guns. The Betty's right engine exploded. The right wing caught fire. The bomber pitched nose down and smashed into the jungle at full speed. Barber went after the second bomber, chasing it out over the water. His first burst shredded the bomber's tail section. His second burst raked the fuselage. The Betty tried to ditch in the water but hit too hard and cartwheeled, breaking apart. Both bombers were down. The entire engagement lasted less than 2 minutes. Mitchell ordered his formation back to Guadalcanal immediately. They didn't strafe the crash sites. They didn't pursue fleeing Japanese aircraft. They simply disappeared back over the ocean at wavetop level. As far as any surviving Japanese pilots could report, American fighters had appeared from nowhere, destroyed 2 bombers, and vanished. Back at Henderson Field, Mitchell reported 2 bombers destroyed. He didn't know which one had carried Yamamoto. He didn't even know if Yamamoto had been aboard. That information would have to come from Japanese sources, and that's where the intelligence officers back at Pearl Harbor held their breath. Would the Japanese investigate? Would they suspect compromised codes? Would Station Hypo's careful work be blown? The Japanese found Yamamoto's body the next day, still strapped into his seat in the jungle where Lanphier had shot down his bomber. He'd been thrown clear of the wreckage, killed either by the crash or by bullets. The sword he always carried was found nearby. The Japanese army patrol that found him initially didn't recognize him. His uniform was burned, his face damaged, but his personal effects confirmed his identity. Japan's greatest admiral was dead. Tokyo didn't announce his death immediately. They kept it secret for over a month while they planned a state funeral and prepared the public for the loss. This delay was perfect for American intelligence. It gave Station Hypo time to monitor Japanese communications to see if there was any indication they suspected compromised codes. The Codebreakers watched for any changes to communication procedures, any hints of increased security, any sign that Japan was investigating how American fighters had found Yamamoto. Nothing. The Japanese conducted extensive interviews with the Zero pilots who survived the engagement. Those pilots reported that American fighters had appeared suddenly, but assumed it was a regular combat patrol that had gotten lucky. The coincidence of American fighters being in that exact location at that exact time was suspicious, but not impossible. Guadalcanal was only 240 miles away. American fighters could have been scouting Japanese positions. The Japanese Navy instituted some minor security changes, but they didn't suspect their codes were broken. Admiral Nimitz breathed a sigh of relief, but he didn't feel victorious. He felt sick. Not because Yamamoto was dead. Yamamoto had killed too many Americans for Nimitz to mourn him, but because of what the operation revealed about the nature of modern warfare. Intelligence had become so powerful that it could kill individual men hundreds of miles behind enemy lines. Codes and mathematics had become as deadly as bombs and bullets, and there was something else. Nimitz had read Yamamoto's biography. He knew that Yamamoto had opposed war with America. Yamamoto had studied at Harvard. He'd traveled across the United States. He understood American industrial capacity. He'd told Japanese leaders that fighting America was foolish, that Japan couldn't win a protracted war. He'd been overruled, and once the war started, he'd done his duty brilliantly. Now he was dead, killed by the same code-breaking capability that had defeated him at Midway. Captain Edwin Layton, Nimitz's intelligence officer, later wrote about a conversation they had the evening after they received confirmation of Yamamoto's death. Nimitz asked Layton if killing Yamamoto had been worth risking the code-breaking secret. Layton didn't have an answer. The intelligence had remained secure, which was lucky, but if Japan had changed their codes, would Yamamoto's death have been worth losing that capability? The question became more complicated over the following months. Yamamoto's replacement was Admiral Miniechi Koga, a competent but far less brilliant commander. Koga didn't have Yamamoto's strategic vision or aggressive instincts. Under Koga, the Japanese Navy became more defensive, more conservative. Some American intelligence officers wondered if killing Yamamoto had actually made the war longer. Would Yamamoto have taken risks that might have given Japan a chance? Would he have fought more brilliantly, forcing America to win harder battles? Or would his genius have simply prolonged Japanese resistance? There was another consequence nobody had anticipated. Japanese morale didn't collapse when Yamamoto died. It hardened. The admiral's death became a rallying cry. Japanese propaganda turned him into a martyr, a hero killed by treacherous American tactics. The narrative was that Yamamoto had been assassinated, ambushed by American fighters while on an inspection tour. This wasn't quite wrong, but it was also presented as a violation of military honor. American forces had targeted a commander personally rather than fighting honorably. The irony was thick. Japan, which had attacked Pearl Harbor without declaring war, which had perpetrated atrocities across Asia, was accusing America of dishonorable tactics. But propaganda doesn't have to be consistent, it just has to be effective. And the Yamamoto assassination gave Japanese propaganda a powerful story about American treachery. For the American pilots who flew the mission, there was no celebration. Mitchell, Lanphier, and Barber were all awarded medals, but the mission remained classified for years. They couldn't talk about what they'd done, couldn't explain how they'd found Yamamoto, couldn't share the story. They'd killed the architect of Pearl Harbor, and they had to stay silent about it. There was also immediate controversy about who had actually shot down Yamamoto's bomber. Both Lanphier and Barber claimed the kill. Their flight paths had diverged during the attack, so there were no witnesses to confirm who had fired the fatal shots. This dispute became bitter and lasted for decades, two American heroes fighting over credit for killing an enemy commander. It tainted the mission's legacy, but the real significance of April 18, 1943, wasn't about individual glory. It was about what the operation revealed about modern warfare. World War II was the first conflict where intelligence could directly kill commanders, not through chance, not through lucky artillery strikes, but through deliberate targeting based on intercepted communications. Yamamoto died because American codebreakers could read Japanese messages, because American analysts could plot flight paths, because American pilots could navigate 400 miles over open ocean and arrive within minutes of their target. This was new. This was warfare transformed by mathematics and technology, and it worked. Station Hypo continued reading Japanese codes for the rest of the war. The intelligence helped win battles, save American lives, and shorten the Pacific campaign. The risk Nimitz took on April 18th paid off, but it was a close call, and everyone involved knew it. Years later, after the war ended and the mission was declassified, Japanese military historians examined what happened. They confirmed that American fighters had intercepted Yamamoto based on intelligence. They acknowledged that Japanese codes had been compromised, and they reached a surprising conclusion. Killing Yamamoto might have helped Japan. His replacement, Koga, was less aggressive, which meant Japanese forces were conserved rather than risked in desperate battles. The war might have ended sooner with Yamamoto alive and continuing to fight aggressively. That assessment is debatable, but it highlights the fundamental uncertainty of the operation. Nimitz made a choice based on incomplete information. He risked intelligence capabilities to kill a single man. It worked out. But it could easily have backfired, costing America its code-breaking advantage while making Japan more determined to fight. Admiral Nimitz never publicly second-guessed his decision, but those who knew him said he thought about it often. War is full of choices where you can't know if you're right until it's too late to change your mind. April 18, 1943 was one of those choices. America killed its greatest enemy and held its breath waiting to see if the cost would be catastrophic. The fact that it wasn't doesn't mean the decision was obviously correct. It means they got lucky. The pilots who flew Operation Vengeance didn't think of themselves as assassins, they thought of themselves as fighter pilots who'd been given a target and had executed their mission. But that's what the mission was: assassination, targeted killing based on intelligence. And it worked because of codebreakers sitting in a basement at Pearl Harbor, reading Japanese messages and breaking ciphers. April 18, 1943 was the day America killed Japan's greatest admiral. It was also the day America proved that World War II would be won not just by soldiers and sailors, but by mathematicians and linguists. The men who broke codes were as deadly as the men who flew fighters. And the decision to risk everything for one target was made by Admiral Nimitz, who understood that sometimes the most dangerous choices are the ones that work.